His story did not begin with the promise of an empire. He was born on December 15, 37 AD, not in Rome, but in the seaside town of Antium. His name was not Nero. It was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. He came from a noble family with powerful connections that threaded through the heart of Roman politics. His father was a respected politician, but his mother, Agrippina the Younger, was a figure of immense significance. She was the sister of Emperor Caligula, a direct link to the imperial bloodline. This connection would shape her son's destiny in ways no one could have predicted at his birth. His early years were marked by instability and loss, a foreshadowing of the chaos to come. The world of a young Roman noble was often precarious. When Lucius was only 3 years old, his father died. This left him without a key protector in a dangerous world. Around the same time, his uncle, Emperor Caligula, exiled his mother, Agrippina. Suddenly, the young boy was an orphan in all but name. He was sent to live with his aunt, away from the center of power and the privileges of his birth. These formative years were spent in relative obscurity, a stark contrast to the life that awaited him. He grew up knowing the sting of loss and the uncertainty of a life dependent on the whims of others. This early experience of vulnerability may have planted the seeds of the deep paranoia that would later consume him. Everything changed with the fall of a tyrant. In 41 AD, Emperor Caligula was assassinated. A new emperor, Claudius, came to power. One of his first acts was to recall Agrippina from her long exile. She returned to Rome, a woman hardened by her experience and burning with a renewed ambition. She was reunited with her son Lucius and immediately began to maneuver for influence within the imperial court. The boy who had been cast aside was now back in the orbit of power. His mother saw in him not just a son but a tool, a vehicle for her own ascent. The reunion was less about maternal affection and more about a calculated strategy for a future she was determined to control. Agrippina's ambition knew no bounds. She set her sights on the highest prize, the emperor himself. After Emperor Claudius's wife, Messalina, was executed for treason, Agrippina saw her chance. She was Claudius's niece, but this did not stop her. With relentless determination, she seduced her own uncle and convinced him to marry her. The Roman Senate had to pass a special law to make their union legal. Once she was empress, her next move was to secure her son's future. She persuaded Claudius to formally adopt Lucius. His name was changed to Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. He was now an official heir, positioned to one day rule the most powerful empire in the world. With Nero now adopted, Agrippina worked tirelessly to elevate him above all rivals. She was especially focused on sidelining Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Though younger than Nero, Britannicus had a more direct claim to the throne. Agrippina understood that this made him a threat to her plans. She ensured that Nero received the best tutors, including the famous philosopher Seneca. She paraded him before the public and the army, building his profile as the capable and favored heir. Every public appearance, every speech was carefully managed to make Nero look like the perfect successor, while Britannicus was kept in the shadows, his own legitimacy slowly eroded by his stepmother's cunning manipulations. To further solidify Nero's position, Agrippina arranged a crucial marriage. She orchestrated his union with Octavia, the daughter of Emperor Claudius. This marriage was a strategic masterpiece. It tied Nero directly to Claudius's bloodline, making his claim to the throne seem even more natural and justified. It was a political alliance, not a love match. The union of Nero and Octavia was a public declaration that the future of the Julio-Claudian dynasty rested with them. Agrippina had successfully woven her son into the very fabric of imperial succession, leaving little doubt as to who would follow Claudius. She had outmaneuvered all her opponents through sheer force of will and brilliant political scheming. As Emperor Claudius grew older, Agrippina became increasingly anxious. She feared that he might change his mind and decide to name his biological son Britannicus as his true heir, after all. The emperor had begun to show favor to his son, and rumors circulated that he regretted his marriage to Agrippina and the adoption of Nero. For Agrippina, this was an unacceptable risk. She had come too far and invested too much to see her plans crumble. She decided that she could not leave the succession to chance or the changing moods of an aging emperor. The time had come for her to take definitive action, to seize the power she had so carefully cultivated for herself and her son. In the year 54 AD, Emperor Claudius died suddenly. Ancient historians are nearly unanimous in their belief that Agrippina was the cause. They say she served him a dish of poisoned mushrooms, a fatal meal that ended his reign and cleared the path for her son. With Claudius dead, Agrippina moved swiftly. Before the news was widely known, she presented Nero to the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who protected the emperor. With their backing secured, Nero was proclaimed the new emperor of Rome. At just 16 years old, the boy who had once been in exile was now the most powerful man in the world, all thanks to his mother's ruthless ambition. In the first years of his reign, Nero was emperor in name only. The true power behind the throne was his mother, Agrippina. She had worked for this moment her entire life and she was not about to step aside. Her influence was absolute. She reviewed state papers, met with ambassadors, and made key political decisions. Her face even appeared on Roman coins alongside her son's, an unprecedented honor for a woman that showcased her co-ruler status. For a time it seemed that Rome was governed by a mother-son partnership. Agrippina believed she could guide the young emperor, shaping his rule according to her own vision and maintaining her grip on the empire she had won for him. However, a young man's desire for independence is a powerful force. Nero soon began to resent his mother's constant interference. He was the emperor, yet he was treated like a child. He started to listen to other voices, seeking guidance from his two main advisors, his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, Sextus Afranius Burrus. These two men were skilled administrators who sought a more stable and traditional form of government. They encouraged Nero to assert his own authority and to push back against his mother's domineering presence. A power struggle began to brew within the palace, a quiet conflict between a mother who would not let go and a son who desperately wanted to be free. Seneca and Burrus guided Nero through what is often called the golden age of his reign. For about 5 years the Roman Empire was governed well. They worked to reform the legal system, reduce taxes and give more authority to the Senate. This period was marked by stability and relative peace. Nero, for his part, seemed content to let his advisors handle the tedious work of administration while he pursued his own passions for music, poetry, and chariot racing. He saw himself as an artist, a performer at heart. The early part of his rule suggested that he might become a benevolent and cultured leader, a far cry from the monster he would later become in the eyes of history. The delicate balance of power could not last. The tension between Nero and Agrippina finally reached a breaking point. Nero had fallen in love with a woman named Poppaea Sabina, the wife of one of his friends. Agrippina despised Poppaea and saw her as a corrupting influence who encouraged Nero's worst impulses. She openly criticized her son's affair and his neglect of his wife, Octavia. This infuriated Nero. He saw his mother's disapproval as another attempt to control his life. The conflict was no longer just about politics, it was personal. Nero began to see his mother not as a guide, but as an obstacle to his happiness and his rule, an obstacle that needed to be removed. The decision to eliminate his own mother was the turning point in Nero's reign. It marked his descent from a promising young ruler into a paranoid tyrant. By 59 AD, influenced by Poppaea and his own growing fear of his mother's plotting, Nero decided that Agrippina had to die. His first attempt was elaborate and bizarre. He designed a special boat engineered to collapse and sink while she was on board, hoping to make her death look like an accident. He invited her to a banquet and then sent her home on the treacherous vessel. But Agrippina was a survivor. When the boat fell apart as planned, she managed to swim to safety, foiling her son's cowardly plot. Having failed to kill her discreetly, Nero abandoned all pretense of subtlety. He was now terrified that his mother would expose his attempt and rally support against him. He chose a more direct and brutal method. He sent a group of soldiers to her villa, with clear orders to finish the job. When the assassins arrived, Agrippina faced them with astonishing courage. According to the historian Tacitus, she pointed to her womb and told them to strike there, as it was the part of her body that had given birth to her monstrous son. They stabbed her to death, ending the life of the woman who had put Nero on the throne. Her murder sent a shockwave through Rome and forever stained Nero's name. With his mother gone, Nero's cruelty escalated. His wife Octavia was the next victim of his paranoia. Poppaea Sabina, now pregnant with Nero's child, pressured him to divorce Octavia and marry her instead. Nero obliged, casting aside the daughter of Claudius, a woman who was still popular with the Roman people. He first exiled her, but public protests in her favor only sealed her fate. Fearing she could become a rallying point for his enemies, Nero and Poppaea fabricated charges of adultery against her. Based on these false accusations, the innocent Octavia was executed. Nero had now murdered his mother and his wife, severing the last legitimate ties to his adopted father, Claudius. The circle of violence continued to widen, consuming even those who had once been close to him. Poppaea herself was not safe. In a fit of rage during an argument, Nero kicked his pregnant wife in the stomach, killing both her and their unborn child. His old advisors were also targeted. He accused his former tutor, Seneca, of being part of a conspiracy to assassinate him and ordered the old philosopher to commit suicide. Seneca obeyed, calmly cutting his veins and bleeding to death. His loyal guard commander, Burrus, also died under mysterious circumstances, with many believing Nero had him poisoned. The emperor was now surrounded by fear and suspicion, trusting no one and eliminating anyone he viewed as a potential threat. In the summer of 64 AD, a catastrophe struck the heart of the empire. On the night of July 18th, a fire broke out in the shops surrounding the Circus Maximus, Rome's massive chariot racing stadium. Fanned by a strong wind, the flames quickly spread through the city's densely packed wooden buildings. The fire raged for 6 days, died down, and then reignited, burning for another 3. By the time it was finally extinguished, 2/3 of Rome had been destroyed. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash and rubble. Thousands were left homeless, and the city that had stood for centuries was a smoldering ruin. It was, honestly, one of the worst disasters in Roman history. Nero was in his villa in Antium when the fire began. Upon hearing the news, he rushed back to Rome. Some historical accounts, like that of the historian Tacitus, report that he acted responsibly. They say he organized relief efforts, opened his private gardens to shelter the homeless, and arranged for food supplies to be brought into the city to prevent famine. In this version of events, Nero is portrayed as a leader trying to manage an overwhelming crisis. He took charge of the immediate response, providing for his suffering people and planning the difficult task of rebuilding. This account paints him as a concerned emperor, not a malicious arsonist. However, a much darker story soon began to circulate, one that has defined Nero's legacy ever since. Rumors spread that the emperor himself had started the fire. His critics claimed he wanted to clear a vast area of the city to make space for a magnificent new palace he wished to build. The most famous and damning detail of this rumor was that Nero had stood on a high tower, watching his city burn. As the flames consumed Rome, he was said to have played his lyre and sung about the destruction of Troy, kind of reveling in the spectacle of devastation he had allegedly caused. This image of the fiddling emperor became a powerful symbol of his madness and cruelty. Whether Nero actually started the fire remains one of history's great debates. The ancient sources are conflicting, and it is impossible to know the truth for certain. The fire likely started accidentally, as fires were common in the crowded city. But Nero's subsequent actions made him an easy target for blame. The Roman people, devastated by their losses, needed someone to hold responsible. The story of the emperor singing while his people suffered was just too compelling to ignore. It solidified the growing belief that Nero was not just a flawed ruler but a monstrous tyrant who cared nothing for his subjects and would sacrifice them for his own selfish desires. In the aftermath of the Great Fire, Nero seized the opportunity to realize his grand architectural vision. On the vast swaths of land cleared by the flames, he began construction of an enormous and honestly opulent palace complex known as the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. This was no ordinary palace. It was a sprawling estate that covered parts of 3 of Rome's 7 hills. The complex included acres of landscaped gardens, artificial lakes and vineyards. The main villa itself was a marvel of engineering and luxury, with rooms decorated in gold leaf, precious gems and intricate frescoes. It was really a monument to Nero's ego, built upon the ashes of his people's homes. The scale and extravagance of the Golden House were, well, just breathtaking. Its most famous feature was a rotating dining room with a ceiling that turned day and night, showering guests with flowers and perfume. In the entrance hall stood a colossal bronze statue of Nero himself, over 100 feet tall. The palace was designed to be a world of its own, a place where the emperor could live out his artistic fantasies in unparalleled splendor. For Nero, it was the ultimate stage for his life as an artist god. For the people of Rome, however, it was a constant and infuriating reminder of their suffering. They watched as the emperor spared no expense on his personal paradise while many of them were still homeless and struggling. To fund this massive building project and the reconstruction of Rome, Nero needed vast sums of money. He imposed heavy new taxes on the provinces of the empire, draining their wealth to pay for his ambitions. He also devalued the currency, reducing the amount of precious metal in Roman coins. This caused inflation and economic hardship throughout the empire. The resentment against him grew with every new tax and every story of the Golden House's incredible luxury. The people felt that he was profiting from their tragedy, building his dream home on their misery. The Golden House became a symbol not of Rome's renewal, but of Nero's greed and detachment from reality. While he built his palace, Nero also needed to deflect the anger of the Roman populace, who still suspected him of starting the fire. He needed a scapegoat, and he found one in a small and misunderstood religious sect known as the Christians. Nero accused them of starting the fire and unleashed a brutal persecution. Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed in horrific ways. Some were crucified, others were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs, and some were covered in tar and set ablaze to serve as human torches in Nero's gardens. This was the first major state-sponsored persecution of Christians, and it cemented Nero's reputation for cruelty for centuries to come. Nero's focus on his artistic pursuits and lavish building projects in Rome left him disconnected from the wider empire. While he composed music and planned his Golden House, discontent was simmering in the provinces. In Britain, a major rebellion erupted in 60 AD, led by a fearsome warrior queen named Boudica. Her husband, the king of the Iceni tribe, had been a Roman ally. When he died, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to the emperor. But local Roman officials ignored his will. They seized the kingdom, flogged Queen Boudica, and brutally assaulted her daughters. This outrageous act of cruelty and disrespect ignited a furious uprising. Boudica rallied her people and other British tribes who were tired of Roman oppression. Her army swept across the province, fueled by a desire for vengeance. They destroyed the Roman colony of Camulodunum or Colchester, burning it to the ground. They then marched on Londinium, or London, and Verulamium, which is St. Albans, slaughtering the inhabitants and razing the cities. For a time it seemed that Roman control of Britain was on the verge of collapse. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, had to rush his legions back from a campaign in Wales to confront the rebellion. Boudica's revolt was a terrifying reminder that the empire's hold on its territories was not always secure. The final battle between Boudica's massive tribal army and the disciplined Roman legions was a brutal and decisive clash. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the superior training, tactics, and equipment of the Romans won the day. Boudica's army was crushed and the rebellion was savagely suppressed. Boudica herself is said to have taken poison to avoid being captured. Although the Romans ultimately triumphed, the revolt had been a costly and humiliating affair. It exposed the corruption and brutality of some Roman administrators, and served as a stark warning about the dangers of pushing provincial subjects too far. The event shook Roman confidence and highlighted the ongoing struggles at the frontiers of the empire. Far to the east, another major rebellion was brewing. In 66 AD, long-standing tensions in the province of Judea exploded into the First Jewish-Roman War. The conflict was sparked by a combination of religious friction, heavy taxation, and incompetent Roman governance. Jewish rebels overwhelmed the Roman garrison in Jerusalem and annihilated a Roman legion sent to restore order. This was a full-scale war, not just a tribal uprising. Nero dispatched one of his best generals, Vespasian, to crush the revolt. The war would rage for years, continuing long after Nero's death. It would ultimately culminate in the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, a cataclysmic event in Jewish history. As rebellions flared in the provinces, Nero's behavior in Rome grew more erratic and self-indulgent. He became obsessed with his public performances as an actor, poet, and musician. He forced senators and nobles to attend his lengthy recitals, where they were forbidden to leave, even if they were bored or ill. He saw himself as a supreme artist, but the traditional Roman elite saw his stage antics as scandalous and disgraceful for an emperor. His actions were a deep offense to Roman dignity and tradition. He neglected the serious duties of statecraft in favor of the applause of the crowd, further alienating the powerful men whose support he desperately needed. The emperor's disconnect from political reality was most evident in his grand tour of Greece in 67 AD. While wars raged in Britain and Judea, Nero traveled to Greece to participate in the ancient artistic and athletic festivals, including the Olympic Games. The Greeks, eager to flatter the emperor, rescheduled all the major games to take place during his visit so he could compete in them all. He competed in chariot races, musical contests, and acting competitions. Unsurprisingly, he was declared the winner of every event he entered. He returned to Rome celebrating a great artistic triumph, completely oblivious to the crumbling state of his empire and the growing conspiracies against him. This neglect and self-obsession finally cost him the loyalty of the military, the ultimate source of an emperor's power. The generals in the provinces grew tired of his incompetence and tyranny. In early 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, openly rebelled against Nero. He denounced the emperor as a corrupt tyrant and called for his overthrow. Although Vindex's revolt was put down, it had lit a fuse. Soon after, the governor of Hispania, or Spain, Servius Sulpicius Galba, also declared his opposition to Nero. Crucially, Galba gained the support of other powerful governors and their legions. The rebellion was spreading, and Nero no longer had the military forces to stop it. Back in Rome, the situation unraveled with terrifying speed. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguards, were bribed to abandon him and declare their allegiance to Galba. The men who were supposed to protect Nero had turned against him. Seeing that he had lost the support of the army, the Senate grew bold. They had long despised Nero but had been too afraid to act. Now they followed the military's lead. The Senate officially declared Nero a public enemy. This was effectively a death sentence. It meant that any Roman citizen could kill him without punishment. The emperor, who had once held absolute power, was now a hunted fugitive in his own city. With the Senate's decree, Nero's world completely collapsed. He was abandoned by his friends and servants. Panicked and alone, he fled the imperial palace in disguise, seeking refuge in a villa owned by one of his freedmen just outside Rome. He spent his final hours in a state of terror and indecision. He knew that his enemies were closing in and that a gruesome public execution awaited him if he were captured. His guards would likely flog him to death in the Roman Forum. The thought of such a humiliating end was unbearable for a man who saw himself as a great artist and a divine figure. He contemplated escaping but realized there was nowhere left to run. As the sound of approaching horsemen grew louder, Nero knew his time was up. He could not bring himself to take his own life. He paced back and forth, lamenting his fate and bemoaning his cowardice. He ordered his remaining companions to dig a grave for him, weeping as he watched them work. He repeatedly muttered that it was a shame for such a great talent to be lost to the world. He was paralyzed by fear, unable to perform the final act himself. His companions urged him to be brave and to end his life with some dignity before his enemies arrived to capture and torture him. Finally, with the soldiers just moments away, Nero placed a dagger to his throat. He still hesitated. It was only with the help of his loyal secretary, Epaphroditos, who pushed his hand, that he was able to drive the blade home. As he lay dying, a Roman centurion burst into the room, hoping to capture him alive. Seeing the emperor bleeding on the floor, the soldier tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. With his last breath, Nero looked up at the centurion and uttered his famous final words, "Qualis artifex pareo, what an artist dies in me." Even in death, his mind was on his own perceived greatness. Nero died on June 9, 68 AD, at the age of 30. His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which had ruled Rome since Augustus. His reign left a complex and dark legacy. To many Romans, he was a monster, a matricide, a tyrant who persecuted the innocent and burned his own city. Yet, for some in the eastern provinces and among the common people of Rome who had enjoyed his public games and lavish spending, he was remembered with a strange fondness. For centuries, impostors claiming to be a resurrected Nero would appear, attesting to his enduring, if notorious, fame. His life serves as a cautionary tale of how absolute power, paranoia, and self-obsession can corrupt a ruler and bring an empire to the brink of chaos.